now I have Nolan Haims with me. We spent actually 4 hours yesterday during his masterclass. He did a very, very cool masterclass on how to present your data. The first thing actually I learned interesting about Nolan is that he was a magician. And I learned that during a webinar that I watched, and it was maybe a year and a half ago. And I was talking to Boris from our team, and I was like, did you know that Nolan was a magician? And he's like, yeah, that's what he used to do. But his passions are now in another place. I don't know if he's still doing magic. Maybe he's doing it for his kids. But his passions are already somewhere else. And to be very honest with you, what I've really loved about Nolan and his sessions is that he's very straightforward and very, he talks about extremely, how to say, complicated topics in a very understandable way. And I really, really love that. And today we have a topic which is not that common in presentations, I would say yet, but it's inclusive presentations and how we can do them. So Nolan, now it's your turn.
Thank you, Eva. All right. So we're talking about inclusive presentations. What does that mean, and where am I coming from? I want to sort of set that up. I am not a diversity and inclusion trainer. I don't yell at people on Twitter about using the wrong word. I'm probably always going to call my 3-year-old daughters "you guys." But where I do come from in this is as somebody who has been creating presentations for clients and for myself for decades, and finding that over this time, audiences have been changing. Right? Clearly, that we always should be audience centric. A presentation is not for the speaker; it's for the audience. And I've noticed that over the years, audiences have been changing. They're getting more diverse, obviously, and yet presentations are, not always keeping up with those audiences. So when we talk about inclusivity, to me, it's a huge topic that includes accessibility. We're going to talk a little bit about accessibility later today, but this whole thing is not just about that. It includes authenticity as well. Again, just being authentic and true to the audiences that you're talking to. Now, whenever we start talking about this thing, people get nervous. I get nervous. By the way, I'm going to make mistakes from an inclusivity, from an accessibility, from an authenticity perspective today. We always do, right? It's sort of impossible. But people get nervous, and I do as well, because we always feel like we're doing it wrong. We're not doing it right. Sometimes it's not even worth trying. But the thing I want you to take away from today, if you take away nothing else, is the phrase, a best faith effort. Now, my good friend Glenna Shaw gave this to me when I was struggling. I was doing an accessible document, not in PowerPoint, in InDesign for the U.S. military hospital system, right? So the big government thing had to be accessible, and I was sweating bullets. I'd never really done it before. She said, Nolan, the letter of the law, at least in the U.S., right? The law, the legal, law says you must make a best faith effort. You don't have to be perfect. You have to make a best faith effort. And that's what I want everyone to do when we're thinking about making a presentation more inclusive. You're not going to get it right 100%. There is no 100% right? And people are going to disagree on this or that. Yes, there's some technical things which, we want to aspire to hit, but generally we want to make that best faith effort. So there. What does inclusivity mean, at least for today? What am I going to be talking about? Well, again, it includes lots of stuff, but specifically, I like to pay attention, and we're going to pay attention to race and ethnicity, gender and sex, age, language, ability. But specifically what we're going to cover related to all of those items, and there's not a one-to-one relationship here, but is slide design, imagery, delivery, language, and then 508 compliance. That's the U.S. law. I know every other country has different laws and terms for it, but the general accessibility term, that's the last thing we're going to try to cover. We're going to scratch the surface of it. We're going to scratch the surface on a lot of stuff today because it is a huge topic. But let's first start off by talking about designing slides for audiences, for all audiences. And the first type of audience, the main type of audience we're presenting to are human beings, right? So forget about abilities or disabilities or language or age. They're human beings, and human beings have human brains that want to look at slides like this. Now, I don't mean slides that are greasy and devoid of nutrition. I mean that the slides are glanceable. Now I'm talking about on-screen presentations, live presentations, speaker-guided ones mostly. We're not really addressing the reports or print presentations. So on-screen speaker-guided presentations should be like a good billboard, understandable in just a few seconds, right? Yeah, you shouldn't have to spend 30 seconds reading a billboard. You shouldn't have to spend 30 seconds reading a slide. So to achieve that, we need to do a few things. Again, a lot of things, but the three top line things are we want to really exploit and make use of what's called the PSE, which we're going to talk about in a second. We want to edit down our text as much as possible. Human brains do not want to read lots of text, and we want to use more slides as well, and those will help with the first two items as well. So the PSE, that stands for the picture superiority effect, and I always, no matter what I'm talking about, whatever presentation topic I'm talking about, I'm going to find a way to talk about this, because essentially, I didn't make it up, it's a real scientific thing that says people process and remember information far better as images than they do as text. So when we're trying to make glanceable presentations, we don't want to give them just a wall of text, right? As I get my little beach ball in my presentation. We'll advance the slides in just a second, I'm sure. So we don't want to just give audiences a wall of text because, yes, they're literate, they can read, but that's not the way human brains respond to imagery or to information. They can, but they really want to respond visually. They want to see visuals. And I apologize. We had one technical snafu right before we started. I'm going to actually, I think I may have to restart. Hang on one second. I think I may have to restart PowerPoint. I don't know why why we're having some gremlins today, but I'm going to restart PowerPoint. So that's just going to take a second. And then we will pick up with, the picture superiority effect, I promise here. Okay, let's get her going. We had one right before we started. We had one audio video snafu that we fixed. No problem. Now, of course.
In the meantime, if you want,
do you have any questions?
While you're starting, of course, people are asking, how do you make these subtitles?
How do I make subtitles? We are going to talk about that.
Yeah.
That is an amazing feature built into PowerPoint. And just in case this doesn't work, I do not know what's going on. I am going to try to get this up on my other computer, my backup computer here, and we may have to go there because I may need to share from my other computer. I should have had that already up. So yeah, so the subtitles we're going to talk about that. Of course, now I'm having. Okay, give me 1 second on this.
Sure, no worries.
So we're going to the backup computer and see what we can get on that. Yeah, so the subtitles are built into PowerPoint. They are incredible. I am going to give a demo later on that, but I always try to use it. I also, as we'll see, I always ask audiences when I'm presenting if that would help them. Okay, let's see if we can get this one up. Get our primary going. All right, PowerPoint is really, maybe I shouldn't have done that update yesterday, right? You never want to do the update right before. Okay, here we go. All right. All right, are we back? Are we good?
Yes, all good.
Okay, good. Thank you for sticking with that. So we were talking about the picture superiority effect, right? So audiences do not want a wall of text, right? They want some sort of imagery. So even doing something as simple as this to this slide is going to bring that in. We want to always try to bring some sort of imagery onto our slides. But then we have to deal with the next thing, which is all that text, and we need to edit down our text. Again, we're not even talking about accessibility. We're talking about human brains, human attendees these human audiences, they don't want to read this. So there are lots of ways to edit down text. One of my favorites is the 3-word challenge, where you try to get everything, every item, every bullet point down to 3 words. You take out the sub bullets, the parentheticals, and you try to get it down to something that the speaker, because we're speaker guided here, can expand and expound upon. And then the next item, don't worry, I know this slide is not perfect. We're going to come back to it. But the last thing is try to use more slides, because that's another technique to edit down text if you simply split up your content, right? If you are able to split up your content onto however many slides, if you have 3 minutes, whether you take 1 slide to do 3 minutes or 4 slides, it doesn't matter, right? And that's another way to be more inclusive of audiences to those human brains. So that's just a little bit about glanceability, how to sort of make slides more glanceable. But let's move on to accessibility, right? That's a scary word. And again, there are a lot of techniques. The top 3 for me are increase text size, increase contrast, and try to make things color safe. So now we're starting to get into audiences, of course, human audiences, but audiences that do have some sort of disability or deficiency or limited ability in something. So the first is to increase text size, right? And look, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if, you're not talking to audiences with diagnosed vision, or deficiencies or anything, disabilities, but whoever it is, if somebody's standing at the back of the room, or if somebody's viewing something remotely on a small iPad, you can't have 10-point type. So you've got to increase that type size. Similar to this, we want to increase contrast. That is absolutely a part of accessibility, but that helps for anybody, right? If you're going to do knockout boxes, make them, high contrast. If you're want to use a gray over white, it's got to be a pretty dark gray. You can't do sort of light gray over white. And the last item is make things color safe. Now, this is for a number of reasons. One is color deficiency in people, or what's usually termed color blindness. You might not have any problem with this pie chart other than it's just kind of ugly from an aesthetic point of view. But if I showed this slide to my father and said, can you make a business decision based on this? He'd throw it right back in my face, because he has a type of color blindness in which this is what he sees. So, color blindness affects about 7 to 10% of men worldwide. It's very rare among women. But forget that, because even if somebody takes your presentation and prints it out in black and white, you're in the same issue anyway. So for all these reasons, yes, you can go in and find color safe palettes and there are color checkers for that. But honestly, what I usually do is I check things in black and white, but also I just try to design things in which color is not an issue. Specifically when it comes to charting, that's generally where color issues come in. I don't use color to tell a data story. We talked about that yesterday. I don't use color to try to tell any sort of story. I can use it for aesthetic purposes, but I'm going to go with a bar chart in which it's just not an issue. So try to make those decisions. Try not to rely on color for any sort of communication if you can, and then it just becomes a non-issue. So that's a little bit about slide design. Let's move into imagery now, right? Image selection, right? Because we've got to be using imagery. We've got to be using, the picture superiority effect. If I put this slide up in front of you, or if this slide was presented to you by a client, let's say, I hope everybody, and I assume everybody listening right now, would look at it and say, excuse me, the image is okay, but I don't think that text is quite appropriate. A CEO is more hands-on because he has to be. You would probably see that, right? Because textual, yes, CEOs are not only men, we know that, but that's what the text is sort of being non-inclusive about. But let's talk about the imagery, because let's say you did have, you wrote it correctly. CEOs are more hands-on than ever before. But now we've got to look at the image choice. And while this is a fine image, he looks kind of like he might be a tech CEO. I like the blurred background. I like the color scheme. We've got to take a step back and start thinking about defaults, right? Stereotypical defaults. These are the things we have in our mind when we hear the word CEO, when we hear the word nurse, or when we hear the word homemaker or whatever. we start to think in our mind, this is not a bad thing. We can't help but doing it, but we need to look at the totality of our presentation. We need to look at it in slide sorter view and say, is this imagery inclusive, not just from a politically correct standpoint, but from an authenticity standpoint? Are all CEOs young white men in striped shirts with beards? No. There are CEOs that look like this. There are CEOs that look like this. By the way, I love this image. We'll talk about this in a second, where it came from. There are CEOs that look like this. And if you have just one opportunity, one moment to put an image in a deck, it's going to be hard to do. It's going to be hard to find the perfect image that is inclusive of everything. So hopefully this is another reason to use more imagery in a deck, because if you do, that increases your chances of being able to hit more of your sort of authentic world, right? If it's just like, what's the one perfect image that shows a diverse workplace or CEO? It doesn't exist. So that's going to be challenging. But let me go back to the defaults that I was talking about. What do you picture when you hear U.S. military veterans? Now, I know we have people from all over the world, and everybody's militaries sort of look different and have different histories. But in the U.S., at my age, I'm in my 40s, when I think of U.S. military veterans, my default is this. This is what I think about. And there's a reason, because when I was growing up as a kid and we went to those parades, the veterans, military, were World War II veterans, and they were old white guys for the most part, right? So that was my idea of it. But I was doing a project recently, or last year, for the U.S. military hospital system, for the hospital system that their patients are veterans, and we did this whole series of marketing materials, and you can see them here. This was the first pass we sent to the client, and they said, "Well, Nolan, we love this, we love the design and everything, but the imagery, it's looking too old. It's looking like all the veterans are a little too old, and you need to understand that a lot of our patients are in their 20s and 30s, right? They're still military veterans, right?" And I said, of course, they're 20-year-old military veterans who need, health care. And so we made a couple of edits here. Just take a look at this one and this one. And so this is kind of like looking at slide sorter and presentation. We made those edits, and now we're looking at the totality and saying, okay, good. Now we have a good cross-section of demographics and gender and age, and now we're trying to hit everything. So that's a good reason to use more imagery. But when you're searching for imagery, right, where are we going? We're going to, we're going to stock sites, and we're going to Google and stuff like that. And when we do that, that's obviously, a good place to go. But we need to tread carefully, and we need to be aware of what we're being fed, because a lot of those defaults are baked in to these searches, but they are getting better. If I search for CEO on iStock, and that's the site I use most, you get 6 women in the first 11 search results, at least as of a couple weeks ago, right? If I go to, now that's good. Last year, a year ago, we had 4 women in the first 11 search results. So, maybe we're getting a little more equitable. If we go to master file, and honestly, that's not a site I use very often, and this may be the reason, we only get 6 women in the first 40 search results. So we've got to be careful about this. What if we go to like an online search? What if we go into Bing? And look, I know people don't like Bing, but honestly, Bing has a really good image search. In fact, I think it's a little better than Google. So, but if we go there, we get 25 women in the first 49 search results. Okay, that's pretty good. If we go to Google, right, that's where most people go, we get 20 women in the first 45, also pretty good. But we've got to look at some of these results, right? Now, there's some goofy things here and everything, but look at the 4th search result that I get. The 4th search result, if I type in scientist stock photo, is this really awful, horrendous thing? Now, I don't want to blame Alamy, because maybe this image would have good utility in some sexual harassment training. But this is what I get. Now, this is what I get. And it should be noted that everybody gets different Google search results based on different things, right? Based on IP address and location and past search history and stuff. I hope this is not because of any sort of past search history of mine. But a couple of years ago, this image was #1 on Google search results for scientific stock photo. So We've got to be careful, and we also want to be aware of places where we can absolutely get inclusive imagery. There are stock sites proliferating that focus mostly or exclusively on diverse imagery, things like tonal.co or broadly gender photos. And as you saw, iStock keeps getting better. The Gettys and the Shutterstocks are definitely getting better at that. The other sites, maybe not so much, and Google can be the Wild West, we know. If you really want to go beyond Google, go beyond iStock, there are dozens or hundreds of stock sites out there. You can download. This is my one-page stock resource list that I try to keep updated. It's all hyperlinked. It even has a section on diverse imagery. There are sites just for diverse imagery out there. And you can get that from presentyourstory.com/goodies. So that's a little bit about imagery and sort of like expanding our horizons, expanding our search, parameters, and being careful and cognizant of what is coming up in that search. But that's imagery. What about iconography? Now, you can get icons a lot of different places, but one of the places most of us go is the Noun Project, right? It's fantastic. By the way, just yesterday, they updated their plugin in PowerPoint, so you can now bring in SVGs rather than PNGs. So the Noun Project is amazing. The Noun Project was founded and run by Sofia Polyakov, and she's very, very interested in inclusivity and diversity. A couple years ago, they did a whole hackathon to increase their stock of diverse imagery. So now, when you search for president or presidential, under icons, you don't just get icons of men. You get icons of women because not for political correctness, but because there are female presidents. So that's the way I approach it. That's the authenticity aspect. There are female presidents. Programmers are not all just, nerdy, geeky men, in Silicon Valley. There are female programmers. There are, there are all types of programmers. I was going to step in it. We're going to talk about gender and gender identity and all that. I'm not going to get into that, but there are. So now if you go to the Noun Project, you're going to see a more inclusive selection of icons when we're talking about people. So even if you're just picking an icon, now we've got to think about that. And again, if we're using lots of icons, maybe we want to switch them up. Maybe we don't always want to use, icons of people in ties and neckties, right? For various things. If you want to use imagery, though, I mentioned this at the very beginning, like with the CEO, like there is no ideal photo of a CEO that shows diversity, right? It's just never going to exist. And I run into this a lot with clients where they want an image to denote, to stand for a profession or an activity or something. And we see this a lot in like the medical with our pharma clients. So if, for example, I had to design this slide and I chose this photo, what's going to happen with the client, right? If you send this to the client will say, okay, that's good, but is there another image that's not a white man? And you're going to say, okay, sure. There's tons of images, thousands, millions of images. We can use this one. And they'll say, oh, well, that's good. That's more diverse, but it's still a man. Okay, great. No problem. How about this? This is a good image. And they'll say, oh, well, that's good, but she's not wearing a lab coat. I don't know if she's a doctor. She might be, but she could also be a technician, and we have to have this be a doctor. And she's also, by the way, she's looking up. I'd like somebody looking at the camera. There is no perfect image. So here's an inside graphic design trick. Do you want to know what graphic designers do a lot in these situations? Yeah, they do things like that. They get rid of the head, they cut off the head, they find images of people's backs, or they find an image like this in which there is nothing you can criticize about this when it comes to diversity, right? Except, of course, somebody's going to say, well, what about right-handed people? Exactly. So if you try to find imagery like that, and it's hard to find imagery like that, but these types of shots can help shut down those conversations. And again, sometimes it's not even, ethnicity or diversity. Sometimes it's just like, that person is smiling too much, not smiling enough, not looking at the camera, looks a little cross-eyed, looking down. I don't like the facial hair. I mean, there's always going to be an objection. So if you just literally cut the head off sometimes, just crop the head off, Or if you are able to find images in which the person's back is to the camera, those are really hard to find. But if you can, then you can focus on the profession of the person or the activity of the person or the objects that they're using or wearing, and not the person themselves, which really sort of just distracts you. Because in this case, we're trying to show the profession or the activity or the object. So that's just a graphic design sort of inside trick when it comes to imagery. All right, now let's talk a little bit about delivery. And I promise, one of these days, we will get back into the conference room, we will get back into the boardroom, into the auditorium, and we will be presenting live. And when you're back, I know we're going to have to sort of get our muscle memory back to do that, but please don't turn your back on the audience. Certainly not for more than a second or so. And this starts to get into an accessibility thing. People who might have hearing disabilities or English might not be their first language. It can really help to look at their mouth. But that aside, somebody in the back of the room or a bad audio system or the mic, just crackles at the bad time or whatever, or there's crosstalk, just seeing the speaker's face is going to give nonverbal communication. So really try to have your face. I have my camera on right now, I believe, because we'll talk about that as well. I always try to have my face on when I'm presenting. And use a mic. Please, when you're back in that auditorium and the host says, would you like this mic? Do not do this, that I have seen more times than I can count. Don't go say to the audience, I hate mics. Can everybody hear me okay? No, because what is going to happen is two people in the third row are going to say, yeah, I can hear you fine. And meanwhile, the person with 30% hearing in their left ear in the back of the room, they're not going to raise their hand and say, oh, please, it would really help me to have. No. Again, even if the people in the back row do not have hearing disabilities, you want to use the mic. So please, I know sometimes it's annoying, use the mic. And if you're doing Q&A, repeat the question using the mic. Try to give the mic to the audience if that's not possible. Just repeat the question because, somebody in the sixth row asks a question, everybody in front hears it, everybody behind them doesn't. Right? So, and here's another speech coaching real trick. If you repeat the question, you get to reframe it sometimes a little bit into maybe more of a question that's easier to answer rather than, maybe the hard question or the silly question that they ask. So that's another little secret. But that's in the room, that's live. What about online considerations, right? We've all gotten better at presenting online the last year, but still a lot of us have a ways to go. When it comes to inclusivity, ask in advance. Try to get to know your audience in advance. Ask them if there's any things that you should know, any disabilities that they can reach out and contact you about so that you're aware of. Whenever I do a webinar on Zoom, I send out a little questionnaire that I have the registration page and all that. And when we don't do that, and I try to have clients ask when they do internal registrations, I try to have them ask internally. But I always ask this question: do you have any special needs or disabilities we should know about to make your experience better? I.e., do you prefer to leave the camera on, prefer speaker to include subtitles? Do you need the presentation in advance? I hate giving out my presentation in advance, but if somebody asks for that, and about 95% of the time somebody will, then yeah, I'm happy to, right? Because if that is helping them to have a better experience, of course, I'm not going to be a jerk about it. Record the presentation, because people who, you might have talked too fast in English and they speak a different language, or they had to run and pull the dog off the mailman, or their kid was screaming and they missed 5 minutes, right? That's not a disability, having to deal with your kids. But again, it's inclusiveness. It's understanding that people might have a situation, they might have to drop out, and if they can return to the presentation and view it later, that's a way of including people. Do leave your camera on. I'm leaving my camera on now. I was doing a presentation a while back, and a friend of mine from elementary school was on, and she has very significant a very significant hearing disability, and she wears hearing aids. So she can hear, but nonetheless, still her hearing is deficient enough that she she benefits from being able to see people's faces. And so the point is, I was giving this presentation online and I knew she was on, and I don't know what possessed me, but at some point I said, I'm going to turn my camera on so we can, see the screen, demo this. And she in the chat right away, she said, can you put the camera back on, please? And I was like, immediately when I said, what, Nolan, of course, it helps her to have the camera on. So to be able to see my expressions and my lips. And it will help everybody, all your audiences, to, if you spend a little time, make a little more effort with sound, lighting in your camera, right? Don't just use the bad camera from your laptop. Get a decent webcam. They're not that expensive. You didn't have to buy a pair of new, shoes for work this year. So use that money to buy a camera, to buy some, LED lights from Amazon, and make sure your camera is not going up your nose, but is sort of set properly. Okay, so let's talk about language. So everybody's noticed this right off the bat. What is going on below my slides? Live translation, courtesy of Microsoft and PowerPoint. Now, this isn't a special extra feature that I'm paying for. There's not somebody live captioning it. This is simply their AI technology that is baked in to every version of, the new versions of PowerPoint. You do need Microsoft 365 for this, but this is such an unbelievable, amazing, powerful tool. It's under slideshow here. And you can see I have always used subtitles checked on. You can check it on and off. And under subtitle settings, I'm set for it to listen to me in English, United States English, and the subtitle to be English. Now, I could change this to Bulgarian or Finnish or Hindi or like dozens and dozens of language. So if I was speaking to a mostly Japanese audience, for example, I might, click on the Japanese, and it is just fantastic. If you're using this, you can set it below, above the slide. I generally do it below. I think that's the least sort of intrusive. And you do want to make sure that it's picking up your proper microphone, not just because if you're using multiple microphones, you want it picking up the best microphone. Preferably, if you use a headset, you'll get better results by doing that. So I use that almost every presentation. You can use it if you're using PowerPoint, whatever platform you're using, WebEx or Zoom or whatever. If you're sharing your screen, there it is. Just use it in PowerPoint. If you want a bit more of an experience, PowerPoint Live and live presentations, these are some sort of newish terms. If you're working in teams, I believe you can get user specified. Each attendee can get their own subtitle experience. They can turn them on and off. And I don't know if they've rolled it out yet, but I assume eventually each user will be able to have their own translation and just say, I want to view it in Finnish. But without Teams, if you use PowerPoint online, if you present from PowerPoint online, you can use a feature called live presentations, which also gives audiences that. I'm sorry if I'm stuttering over this because they've been changing these features and things, and they're still relatively new and they're not on all platforms. But live presentations provides a URL to individuals that they can go to it on their own computer and get their own translation, and lots of other accessibility features and Teams for they're they can go back slides, they can change the contrast on their own. So it's getting to be a powerful tool. Zoom subtitles, we've been told, are coming. Yes, right now you can insert a captioning service, but we're talking about just sort of just automatic subtitles. Supposedly they're coming. I believe they're still in beta. All right, so that's a little bit about language. Last thing I want to talk about is compliance. Now, so this is when people say accessibility, make your presentation accessible, this is kind of what they're talking about. And 508 compliance, that's the legal section code in the US. And I know every country has something slightly different. So in the US, we'll say 508 is kind of a shorthand. But what does it mean when it comes to PowerPoint? I admit I am not an expert in this, but I will give you a brief tour, and I'm always learning. I'm always learning about this. Microsoft is always improving it and changing it, and there's still a ways to go, but they're working on it. Accessibility is under the Review tab. There's a check accessibility feature. You hit that button, and what are you going to do? You're going to get a little pop-up on the side with a number of things, okay? You're going to get errors, warnings, and tips. Now, these things, the Venn diagrams of these kind of overlap, and some of these are required for accessibility, some are just suggestions, some apply some are not really like the 508 accessibility things. They just have to do with sort of presenting on screen and all sorts. So you will get things like missing alt text. So every image should have alt text. We'll talk about that in a second. Missing slide titles, tables. Tables should be set up in certain ways. And this is all primarily, not 100%, but primarily for people who will take this presentation and run it through what's called a screen reader. So it's not, some of this has to do with presenting live, for example, like contrast, right? It doesn't matter if somebody has a disability or not. We want to have high contrast for our text. But a lot of things like alt text, that really only comes into play if somebody is taking your presentation, meaning you've given them the PowerPoint file, and they're reading it with a screen reader in which it will read aloud items. So for those purposes, tables need to be set up in a certain way. Reading order needs to be in a certain way. Having slide titles is not a necessary thing, but it's a very helpful thing for them to be able to navigate. Here, I can give you, I think we have a few minutes, I think. Even with our snafu, I think we're still doing decent on time. Right now, I'll go into the review tab and let's do a check accessibility on this presentation. And I have gone through and worked on things, but I've intentionally not made it perfect, because you'll see things like duplicate slide title. I have slides, and once you click this, it will actually go to the slide, which is really helpful. You'll see that I have slides that have the same slide title. And, that happens. Sometimes I have slides with no slide title, right? And that's kind of just the way it is. But, but if somebody has a screen reader and they're reading it, you can understand how it'd be confusing for them to see the same slide title over and over. Reading order, you'll see I've got all my slides that I have a problem with reading order. This says check the reading order. It may be good. It may be in the way that you want it read, or you may need to fix it. And the way you fix it, the way screen order sort of works, is that it reads it from the back to the front. So that means if you're looking at this, how do you want a screen reader, or somebody who may not be able to visually see this presentation, how do you want them to read it? Well, you'd want them to read the title first. So that's down here. That's at the bottom. Then you want them to read this, and then this, and then this, and then, okay, it also includes things on the pasteboard, which I find weird, but that may be the way, I think that's the way I want people to read this, but it was a little confused. It said, check the order. That's why it doesn't say the order is wrong. It says, just double check it. On some other slides, it might be wrong. We have hard to read contrast, right? And as I said, like, I get things wrong. This looks pretty readable to me, but according to the algorithms and everything, this white text over this green it's not high enough contrast. So you'll see right there, slide 34, can I fix it? Well, what if I went down here and I made this box darker, and then you'll see it goes away. It disappears because now this is higher contrast. I do have some missing slide titles, missing alternative text. I've got a lot of that because I've got a lot of things that maybe I should have artifacted. I've got this image here that I didn't apply alt text. The way to apply alt text is to go to edit alt text, and then I can, type in, this is an image of a slide with a non-color safe pie chart. However, if I thought that image it wasn't necessary to communicate, like for example, this arrow, that's marked as decorative, and anything marked as decorative just won't be read by a screen reader. They skip over it. So if you got like lots of icons and things, generally we make those decorative. All right, so that is really just scratching the surface of accessibility. If you want to know more about it, these are a couple of spots on Microsoft's website that will give you more information about it. You're going to have a copy of these slides, so the URL, these are crazy URLs, I know, but they're there. They'll be in the slides. You can also just go to, Microsoft.com and search for accessibility. They are very, very interested and they are paying a lot of attention to accessibility and improving it. Where do you learn about this stuff? It is tough outside of Microsoft, but Karen McCall is one of the best people in the business on it. She has courses on accessibility in Microsoft Office. So these are a couple places you can find her courses and her information. And I want to end, so we have just a couple more minutes with questions, but I want to end on one last example, personal example of inclusivity. So I did my data training yesterday, I've done data training for years, data visualization. And there's a point where I talk about being too clever with your charts, and I give some examples of charts that are just too clever for their own good. They're burying the data under sort of, cutesy illustrations. And these are the two the two examples I would always give. And over the years, I started to get more uncomfortable, little by little, every time I put this up with that image on the right. Now, it's not, it's not X-rated. It's not, some people may have no issue with it. I guess I don't myself, but I kept putting it up and I kept wondering, is this necessary? If one person is mildly offended, if it's just sort of just a little gross at this point, like it's just tacky to put this up. And I realized it's just not necessary. My training doesn't rely on this image. And every day, nobody ever said anything about it. But in my stomach, I was always like, oh, should I be showing this? You know what? One day I just said, that's it. I just swapped it out for another one by the same artist, right? Also makes the point. And that was it, right? It was a small change, but it was just not worth it, right? So there we go. So that is that's what I have on inclusivity, and I really just want to drill this home. If you take nothing away from this, then this phrase: make a best faith effort. Okay, Eva, we've got a few minutes. Do we have questions? Of course, I'm sure we have questions.
So, Nolan, there has been a storm going on in the chat. People were discussing a lot on the topic of inclusivity, and I've noticed that a lot of people actually work for international companies, and maybe some of them are struggling with finding or basically adapting their presentations to inclusivity. So they found this accessibility feature in PowerPoint quite useful, which is quite cool. I also think that this feature brings immense value in terms of accessibility and what can you do with your presentation, because people typically ask, okay, so what can I do regarding that? Well, there is already a tool that can help you do it, so that's quite great to read. There is one question here around the photo that you showed with the doctors. The first one was a male, the second one was a female, and the person said, isn't it a problem that you're not able to trigger that strong emotion when you replace a picture of a person with, for example, just the hand with a tablet? Is it worth to pay that cost?
That's something you have to decide on your own in a case-by-case basis. Because we're always looking. We want imagery to be emotional. We want we want imagery to be able to convey things that text can't. But if a client is more concerned about excluding certain people or being stereotypical, then that's their concern. If they want to first and foremost communicate diversity, then we might again push for more images and use lots of different types of people. But these are decisions you have to make. Of course, like somebody with a glove with a latex glove, that's emotional than a doctor holding the hand of his patient. You see both of them. These are judgment calls that you're just going to have to make.
I fully agree on that one. It's as you already mentioned, it's not possible to please everyone. But again, we need to make that effort because it still is important as audiences indeed are getting more diverse. So we need to be prepared for that. And how do we actually deal with check accessibility when our slides has duplicate slides because of morph, because we were discussing a lot in the previous sessions how to use morph. So obviously people are already kind of connecting things.
Yeah. So here's the thing to keep in mind. When somebody wants to make something accessible, generally that's for the sake of, again, there are other issues like contrast and stuff, but we're generally talking about handing that presentation over to somebody distributing it who might read it with a screen reader. And in that case, I would suggest having a different version of the presentation, one in which those 5 slides for that morph effect, just get put in, because morph is not going to work. Animation doesn't work in a screen reader. So either, make one slide that is just the static graphic for it, or design them in a different way, and have that be the handout. Because again, if you're not handing your presentation out to somebody, alt text is a non-issue, right? Because the only way people are going to digest it is up on a screen that you're giving. So just think about that. Like, some people want to make things accessible when they're never even giving out, I have to have my alt text. Yeah, but if you're never giving your presentation to anybody, it's kind of a non-issue.
Absolutely, this makes sense. Definitely makes sense to just to try and to think of or having two files maybe. Okay, since we're a little bit after the time, I just have one more question, and it's people are asking. So our old brain is basically triggered and is used to thinking into stereotypes. So how do we overcome this?
It's simply awareness. That's the only thing you can say. We just have to be conscious of it and aware. And it's certainly helpful when the client says, let's have some people be a little older. That's it. I mean, there's no way to change that other than just being more aware of it and more cognizant and starting to make, as I keep saying, that best faith effort.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Nolan, thanks a lot for such a great session. We had a lot of fun yesterday during the masterclass. I had even more fun maybe today. I'm not sure with your session, but really thank you for being part of it. Thank you for being part of Present to Succeed.